Hello, everybody, and welcome to our training session on Cloud Connector Edition 141. This is the What's New session for CCE 141. So the expectation here is that you already have a base understanding of what Cloud Connector is, and we're going to take you through all of the new features that we've added into 141. If you're not yet familiar with what Cloud Connector Edition is, take a look on our Academy site for the training on Cloud Connector All Up, where you can get a very detailed look at what Cloud Connector is and how it operates. So if we look at Cloud Connector Edition 141, what's new? Well, there's three main areas that we want to talk about when we talk about what's new in 141. The three areas are appliance registration, high availability, and automated updates. And really, it's these three areas that provide all of the greatest investments and new features that we have available in the 141 version of Cloud Connector. So let's dive right in and take a look at the first area that's new, and that is our appliance registration. Now, when we look at registering appliances to Office 365, one of the first questions that typically comes up is, well, why would I need to do that? What's the point of registering appliances into Office 365? Well, there's actually two main reasons that we look at registering the CCE appliances to O365, and that is for appliance management, as well as for mediation server high availability. Now, when we think about appliance management, well, what's interesting about that? Well, take a look at the output here from our commandlet get CS hybrid PSTN site. This allows me to actually see the appliance information for this particular site. In this case, I'm looking at HA site 2, and I'm actually able to see all of the relevant information for my Cloud Connector appliances that are deployed in this particular site. I can see whether auto update is enabled, for example. I can even see the time windows that I have set, and we'll talk more about that when we get into the auto update section here in just a second. The second area is the mediation server high availability. Now, this is a really critically important piece for the whole HA story all up, right? When we deploy these Cloud Connector appliances, we have these set of VMs that are stacked onto a physical hypervisor, but when we want them to act in a high availability fashion, they need to know a little bit about each other. Right, so if you have multiple hypervisors deployed with multiple sets of VMs on them, as Cloud Connector 141 deployments would go, they need to know about each other. And that's the key here when we look at mediation server high availability. When we register the appliance into Office 365, the topology information is also made available in Office 365 for the other appliances to consume. As such, when I go to deploy my Cloud Connector Edition appliances, say, for example, I'm going to deploy 2 Cloud Connector Edition appliances in this particular site. When I deploy the topology, I will actually be able to see in the topology both mediation servers, the mediation server that would be on the first appliance that I deploy, as well as the mediation server that would be on the second appliance that I deploy. That means that the Cloud Connector appliances are aware of each other and are then able to route calls appropriately to the various mediation servers, regardless of which particular Cloud Connector appliance is being used. And if you dig a little bit deeper into the topology file itself, you can actually see a representation of these mediation servers. Of course, it's a lot easier to just look at the output of the PowerShell command, and you can see, as we have highlighted there, I have CC Mediation 1 and CC Mediation 2. That's each of the respective mediation servers that are deployed across each of the Cloud Connector Edition appliances. Now that leads us to our next discussion, which is high availability, right? So registering the appliance gives us the ability to gain some insight into the appliance itself, as well as being able to distribute the relevant information about the topology amongst the Cloud Connector Edition appliances. Let's look a little bit deeper at how that stacks up here. So when I look at the high availability model for CCE, currently we can have up to 4 Cloud Connector appliances deployed per PSTN site, right? So we go in, we register the appliance, That is going to create the PSTN site, and then I can have up to 4 Cloud Connector appliances deployed in that particular PSTN site. The calls will be distributed in a random order between the cloud connectors that are inside of that same site. So if I had 3 Cloud Connector appliances, for example, in a single PSTN site, the calls would be distributed randomly between those 3 cloud connectors. Now, from a capacity planning perspective, it's really going to come down to what type of load we're looking at and what level of availability we want to have. So for example, if I want to go the N+1 route, so for example, I want to have 3 + 1 available for resiliency purposes, right? So the N+1 model, we have a max of 4, so we have a 3 + 1. That would effectively give me 1,500 calls within that PSTN site. If I don't do an N+1 model and I just do straight up, 4 of them, of course, then, of course, I could get up to 2,000 calls in that PSTN site. But if I'm looking at N+1 or N+2, you can see the formulas that we call out here on the slide that would give you an idea of how to handle the capacity planning aspect with regards to high availability. Now, let's talk a little bit about, from a high availability perspective, what the traffic flow is going to look like. So as I start here on the right-hand side, you can see that at the very top, we have John, our online user, making an outbound call, right? And you can see the way that the SIP traffic goes for John. His SIP traffic is going to the Skype for Business online infrastructure. And based on the fact that this is an outbound PSTN call that John is making, John's account is assigned to this particular PSTN site. So the call is going to now, from a signaling perspective, traverse from the online infrastructure to the Cloud Connector Edition appliance. Now, it's going to, in this particular case, I have the arrow drawn to this first Cloud Connector, but remember, it could be going to any of the Cloud Connector Edition appliances that we have on premises here in this particular site. You see the next hop that we go through here is as the call comes into Edge. Edge will then send it to its next hop mediation that you see here inside of that Cloud Connector appliance. And then based on the configuration that we've put inside of the Cloud Connector INI file, we'll know which mediation server and which gateway pair we can talk to so that we can route that particular call outbound as appropriate. From a media perspective, the next red line that you see drawn here, if John in this particular instance happens to be outside of the corporate network, he's going to be sending his traffic through the media relay component that we have on Edge, which will then allow that media stream to go through to mediation to the corresponding gateway. Likewise, we see here at the bottom a second user, Cornel, who is an online user in the internet as well. Same idea, making an outbound call. Signaling is going to go to the Skype for Business online infrastructure. In this particular instance, the call gets routed to the second Cloud Connector, right? Again, as we mentioned, it's a random order distributed between these. So in this case, Cornel's ended up at the second Cloud Connector appliance that's deployed in this particular site. Same idea, this particular Cloud Connector is utilizing his own mediation server to be able to send that call out to the corresponding PSTN gateway as necessary. Media would flow the same as we had mentioned before. The only difference here really being that in this particular instance, Cornel's media relay is going to go through the edge that's on Cloud Connector 2 rather than utilizing Cloud Connector 1 in this instance. Now, because the Edge servers and the Cloud Connector appliances know about the entire topology, it is possible that in the event that perhaps the mediation server on Cloud Connector 2 is having issue, that the Edge on Cloud Connector 2 would be able to send the call to the mediation server on Cloud Connector 1 as necessary, because they do understand and know about all of the mediation servers that are in the environment. Now, there's a couple things to think about when we deploy the high availability aspects, especially when it comes to the mediation pool. From a deployment perspective, there's really two major steps that we look at when we're deploying a Cloud Connector appliance. And that is running the registration command, which is going to create and establish the O365 appliance information and site information. And then there's the actual install process, which checks against Office 365 to ensure that all the relevant information is there from a site perspective, gets the updated topology, and then allows the bits and VMs to actually be deployed on that Cloud Connector Edition appliance itself. Now, let's take an example where we have a Cloud Connector deployed today in a site, but it's only a single. And now we've decided, hey, I want to add some high availability to this. So in this particular site, I want to add a second Cloud Connector. Well, what do? Well, as you would guess, the first step in the deal is to register that new Office 365, or that new Cloud Connector appliance, to Office 365. Now, here's where it gets interesting, right? Because when I go to register that second appliance, that second appliance knows about the entire topology, including the first one, right? Because I had to update the Cloud Connector INI file and so forth. So that new appliance knows everything. But the first guy, he doesn't, right? Because at the time that he got deployed, he was the only guy there, right? He was the singular appliance. No worries. We have a commandlet that we can utilize called our publish commandlet, which essentially, the technical commandlet is publish CCE Appliance, but the publish commandlet will basically be run on that first Cloud Connector appliance to basically tell it, hey, you need to go and check out the updated topology information and pull that down so that you now know about the mediation servers that are deployed throughout the entire site, and you don't just have your particular view of the world, right? So once the publish command is run on that first Cloud Connector appliance, and he now understands all, right, and sees all, then we can go back to the new appliance that we're adding to the site and go ahead and run the install process there. If we want to remove an appliance from the site, we need to unregister it, and then we need to go to the remaining appliances and run the publish CCE Appliance command there as well, so that we let those additional appliances know, hey, we just took somebody out of the topology, right? A particular Cloud Connector appliance has now been removed, so you have to update your topology as well. As you might guess, when you start looking at high availability within a site and even between sites, there's a lot of planning aspects that you have to go through, right? Especially when it comes to the various names that are used. Now, I've shown a snippet here of the considerations that we have for high availability within a single site and then multi-site high availability. This is taken straight off of TechNet, so you can certainly go back to our TechNet documentation and pull this up. But this allows us to see some of the more specific things that we need to be thinking about, right? One of the examples that we can look at is right here. If we look at the external FQDN, sorry, we'll go back a slide here. If we look at our external FQDN being the same across instances within a single site with HA, that's how we ensure that, as we saw on my diagram earlier, when my first user, John, sent his call in to that particular site, it happened to hit Cloud Connector 1, but when Cornel sent his call in, it went to Cloud Connector 2, because both of those Cloud Connector appliances had the same external FQDN. So at that point, it was just DNS load balancing, right? There were multiple DNS records in our public DNS for that particular name, and the DNS load balancing mechanism would allow us to pick which one we wanted to go to, right? The key thing here is to realize that when we're doing the high availability aspects, yes, there are some nuances that we've built into the product to allow it to understand that there's multiple mediation servers and how to get around and this and that. But at the end of the day, you've got to plan it properly and take the appropriate steps to ensure that you have the right names in the right locations, whether they need to be same or different, right? Depending on the scenario that you see here, like our single site with HA or our multi-site. Ensuring all that planning is done upfront. Our appropriate entries are in DNS as required, and then our HA process will be able to do the magic that it needs to do from an all-up availability perspective. The fun area, the automated updates piece. When I think about automated updates, first and foremost, you need to think of the Cloud Connector appliance as an extension to Office 365. So the VMs that are on there, yes, we give you some gory detail as to kind of how that gets created and how these things are established and what they're used for. But at the end of the day, you really need to think in your mind of those virtual machines as being a sealed appliance, right? A sealed set of virtual machines. So that means that when I look at this as an extension of the cloud, if the cloud is requiring an update, the cloud is going to push that update down to my Cloud Connector Edition appliances. How does it do that, and what does that mean? What does it do? Well, check out what we're going to talk about here. First off, Auto Update provides automatic updates to the operating system, both of the host and the virtual machines themselves. But it also provides automatic updates to Cloud Connector editions, right? So the current edition right now is 1.4.1. Whatever the next edition is that comes out, we would provide an automatic update process to deploy that new version. Now, this happens in configurable time windows that are assigned on a per site basis. So you as the tenant administrator can go in and define the exact time window that you would like the Cloud Connector appliances to use to perform these various updates. Now, what actually happens during the updates? Well, we're building, when we do an actual Cloud Connector Edition update, for example, we're building a new set of virtual machines in the background, right? So your existing Cloud Connector appliance is up and running, those VMs are doing their business, and in the background, we're building a brand new set of VMs with the updated bits. Once those are complete, from a build perspective, the automation process will drain active traffic from your running VM set. And once those are completely drained, we'll switch to using the new VM set. The existing VM set will remain. So in the event that something goes haywire or a little off when the upgrade happens, it can always go back to the previous virtual machines and continue running. Now, again, we want to make sure that we think about these virtual machines as a sealed appliance, right? So oftentimes there'll be requests for, well, what can I put inside the virtual machines? Can I put antivirus software? Can I put what have you? Think of them as sealed virtual machines, right? Because as this update process happens, we're going to have new machines built in the background. And those new virtual machines are going to be switched to take over for the existing virtual machines that are live. Couple slides here that talk about some of the guts and gory bits and bobs that we do to actually configure this thing. Really, the only thing we have to think about from a tenant administrator perspective is the auto update window, right? Well, of course, we have to figure out, is it turned on or not, which is the first options that we see here. We can use get CS hybrid PSTN site and set CS hybrid PSTN site to be able to control the enable auto update property, right? Setting this to true will turn on the auto update feature. From there, we can create our own custom auto update time windows. Now, this step here is really talking about the creation of a particular window or set of windows, right? By itself, this doesn't really do anything because after you create these time windows, you actually have to then go and assign them. But you can see some of the examples that I give here. New CS tenant update time window, and in this case, the first identity that I gave it was night. Right, so this one happens to be running at 2200 hours with a duration of 6 hours. Right, so that's the window that I call the night window. I have another example there of a weekday night window, which only happens during certain days of the week. And I have a midday of month window that only happens on the 15th of every given month. Once I've created these time windows, and you can have up to 20 time windows that you create, you'll then take these time windows and assign them to your PSTN site or sites if you have more than one. There are two different time windows that you can assign. There's a bits update time window and an OS update time window. And each of them can be assigned to different sites with different purposes. So as you can see, for example, at the bottom, we have set CS hybrid PSTN site. We'll do -identity and put in whatever the name of our site is. Then I can choose the first option, bits update time window. And there you can see I do add midday of month, weekday night. Whereas OS update time window, in this case, I do night. Right? So that allows me to choose what particular time windows I want to have for the various components. They don't have to be different. They could all be the same, or they could all be different, right? It all just depends on what that time window is that you want to establish for the auto update process to occur. That's really the main crux of what you as a tenant administrator will need to be responsible for when we look at the auto update process itself. Now, underneath all of this, there's a service called the Cloud Connector Management Service. Right? This service is responsible for handling the auto recovery, auto update mechanisms, runs on the host, right, hypervisor system, and it does a lot of the coordination of efforts that we're talking about here. Right? It will generate events into our event viewer under the Windows application logs. It shows up as CCE management service, and it does generate its own logs that you can see here under Program Files, Skype for Business, Cloud Connector Edition, Management Service. Again, this is on the host Hyper-V system where you would see this relevant information. Now, the neat thing about having this information and this service running is we get to see a lot of this information bubbled up into the Office 365 service. So I can run commandlets like you see here of get CS hybrid PSTN appliance and actually be able to pull back relevant information on this appliance. Things such as the name of the site that this particular cloud connector is deployed into, the mediation server FQDNs, and more specifically things like registration status, right? So I can see registration status is registered and deployed. So I know that this is a properly registered appliance and it is fully deployed. But then you can see right under that status of error. I've got an issue with this particular appliance, right? Whereas you can see at the second one that we ran where I was looking at a second appliance, this actually is showing that this has a status of running. And technically, actually, I could correct that. That's not a separate appliance. That's after we've actually fixed the problem that I actually have the ability to see a status of running, right? So we are bubbling some of this relevant information back up into the service. And if you want to know what the error was, right, what's actually going on, you look couple lines down from where that status is, and you can see error RTC SRV not found or not running, right? So in this particular instance, we show that error, we show that information in the tenant, and the CCE management service will even attempt to correct some of these issues, right? And in this particular issue, if it's able to get that service started, fantastic, service comes back to life, and then we have this information published again back into Office 365, and I get a chance to now see that its status is running, and I don't have any particular error listed. Sweet. So you get an idea of what we can do with 141, and you're like me, you're like, this is awesome. It's great. How do I do it? What do I do? How do I get to 141? I have 138 deployed today. What do I do? Well, these couple slides will talk a little bit about the upgrade process to 141. And cool thing is, this will be the last time you have to do it, right? Because auto updates can take over from here. Upgrading to 141 follows the following process. We uninstall the existing version in Control Panel. We go and install the new bits from AKMS Cloud Connector Installer, the link that you see here. And then the most important part, confirm that you are using the new INI file and that you've updated it appropriately, right? The Cloud Connector INI file is the key to the deployment of CCE. If that thing is wrong or anything is mistakenly typed in there, that's going to be a bad day, right? So we want to take extra care and make especially certain that we have, number one, the correct version of the INI file, which would be from the 141 installation, and that it has been updated to reflect the correct information specific to your environment. From there, the upgrade process is pretty straightforward, right? We can run a start CC download. which, as you would expect, is responsible for performing the download as necessary. We have the register CCE appliance, so that we can register the appliance again. And then we have, and that registers the new, updated topology information. And then we have install CCE appliance with the -upgrade switch. That's what's going to actually initiate the upgrade process. Now, once the upgrade process has completed, you'll then have the option to activate this new 141 deployment, and that is done using switch-cc version. When that commandlet is run, that basically switches over the running VM set to the new 141 deployment and effectively deactivates, but doesn't necessarily delete, right? Deactivates the previous version. Now, if you have a highly available deployment, you'll want to repeat this process for any additional appliances that you have, doing them one at a time, right? We don't want to do all of them all at once. We want to be able to do them one at a time and then validate and make sure that it is completed successfully. If you happen to have a multi-site environment, same rules apply, right? Upgrade them one at a time on a site-by-site basis. So if I had 3 sites, for example, I would start with site 1, and I would upgrade each of the each of the appliances in that site one by one. When that site is complete, I'll go on to site 2. I'll upgrade each of the individual appliances one by one at that site, and I'll carry on to site 3. Of course, you want to make sure at the end of all this that you're doing validation, because that's a pretty important part of the process. Now, if during the upgrade process you realize that, I got to reset some of the credentials that are being used. When you deploy the appliance itself, you provide credentials for the service account, you provide credentials for the administrator, and so on and so forth. If during the upgrade you want to reset those credentials, you can use install CCE appliance with the -update all credentials prompt. When the upgrade starts, you'll go through the prompts again for some new credentials that you can go ahead and enter. If those credentials are all good, but the only thing you need to do is update your tenant admin credentials, then you can run the set CC credential commandlet with account type tenant admin and be able to put in your new tenant administrator credentials if those have changed for whatever particular reason. So a quick recap, right? What's new in 141? We have the appliance registration. We have high availability, allowing us to deploy up to 4 cloud connector appliances within a given PSTN site. And we have the automatic update process, which will allow us to automatically update the operating systems as well as the versions of Cloud Connector. And again, thinking along the lines of Cloud Connector being an extension to our Office 365 environment, as these updates are required by the service, we need to be able to ensure that these updates are pushed down appropriately and in a very timely manner to these appliances. That's why we built and recommend that our automated update process is enabled. Thank you for your time today, and look forward to seeing and talking to many of you in the future. Thank you.